when a team of Swiss archaeologists stumbled upon something unexpected in a small side canyon of the Valley of the Kings.
A new royal Egyptian tomb has been discovered.
When archaeologists stepped into KV35, they expected a typical royal burial. Instead, they found a tomb that behaved like a riddle.
This is the sarcophagus of Amenhotep II.
Amenhotep II lay in his sarcophagus exactly where he should be. But the rest of the tomb made no sense. Ritual texts stopped abruptly. Amulets were positioned with unusual urgency, and in a hidden side chamber, 9 other pharaohs had been secretly relocated and sealed away without a single inscription explaining why.
Maybe it was a weather vane. Maybe it's a model of something that actually flew. We don't know.
It was a level of secrecy rarely seen in the Valley of the Kings. And then one question rose above every other anomaly in the tomb. Could KV35 belong to the ruler who witnessed an Exodus-like event? Because the deeper archaeologists looked, the clearer the pattern became. KV35 didn't just record a burial, it hinted at upheaval. The gaps in Amenhotep II's reign, the emergency burial decisions, and the silent clustering of kings all suggested a moment in history powerful enough to reshape Egypt and echo into one of humanity's oldest stories. The pharaoh who vanished from history. Imagine a king whose victories once reshaped the map of the ancient world, yet whose name today almost whispers through the corridors of history. How does a ruler that powerful almost disappear? Amenhotep II, the son of the great Thutmose III, should have stood among Egypt's most visible pharaohs. From the earliest records, Amenhotep's youth was defined by rigor. Ancient texts describe him mastering archery, horse riding, running, and rowing. Skills not just for sport, but for survival, for leadership, and for embodying the divine power expected of an Egyptian king. And yet, despite all this vivid early detail, the trail of Amenhotep's life suddenly thins dramatically, an absence that becomes far more suspicious once the tomb KV35 enters the picture. Unlike his father, whose name echoes across temples, stelae, and colossal statues, Amenhotep left behind far fewer grand monuments than expected, and key inscriptions stop abruptly as well. Entire sections of his reign go strangely quiet, and right at the moments when Egyptian rulers are usually the most documented, Amenhotep II seems to fade, on purpose. The mystery deepened when archaeologists opened the tomb KV35. There lay a perfectly preserved king, yet surrounding him were burial decisions that felt rushed, protective, and unusual. The hidden chamber of 9 additional pharaohs only added to the enigma. Why would a powerful dynasty hide its own rulers? KV35 wasn't just a tomb. It felt like a vault of secrets built during crisis, and some scholars believe those secrets may intersect with the very timeline traditionally associated with the exodus of Moses from Egypt. KV35, the tomb that shouldn't exist. When the French Egyptologist Victor Loret uncovered KV35 in 1898, the world of Egyptology was electrified. Here, for the first time in decades, a royal tomb had been found in a remarkable state of preservation.
A new royal Egyptian tomb has been discovered.
But nothing about the tomb behaved the way a royal burial should. At first glance, KV35's architecture seems to follow familiar New Kingdom patterns, a long corridor stretching into the cliff, leading to a burial chamber, with smaller side chambers branching off like secret alcoves. Yet the arrangement is unlike other royal tombs of the period. Most New Kingdom tombs follow a predictable path of corridors, pillared halls, and nested rooms designed to guide the deceased king's journey into the afterlife. KV35, however, contains elements that made little sense for the period. The main burial chamber holds Amenhotep II's mummy in a sarcophagus made specifically for him, a feature rare for its time. But the chambers around him held something almost no Egyptologist had ever seen. The mummies of 9 relocated pharaohs, some predating him and others following him, formed an unprecedented royal cache assembled centuries after Amenhotep's burial. But why here? Why them? And why in Amenhotep II's tomb? KV-35 wasn't arranged like a typical New Kingdom burial. Amenhotep II rested untouched in a sarcophagus made specifically for him, yet the rooms around him looked like a hastily coordinated rescue mission, one orchestrated by priests who may have feared something far worse than grave robbers. Even more unsettling, certain decoration sequences simply stopped, as if the work was abandoned, interrupted, or intentionally erased. And the amulets placed near Amenhotep II weren't just protective, they looked strategically arranged, as if safeguarding against chaos, not simply honor the dead. The deeper archaeologists went, the clearer it became. KV-35 was behaving like a tomb prepared during crisis, and that crisis may intersect with the very period some scholars associate with an Exodus-like event. The objects that hint at a kingdom in crisis. KV-35 isn't just unusual because of its layout, it's the objects inside and the mummies hidden around him that reveal the most unsettling clues. When archaeologists catalogued these artifacts, they discovered patterns so irregular, so unlike typical New Kingdom practice, that some scholars began to wonder whether Amenhotep II ruled during a moment of national upheaval, perhaps even one that faintly mirrors the Exodus tradition. The first signs appear in the royal cache. The 9 pharaohs hidden in Amenhotep II's side chamber were placed in reused coffins, many with names scratched out and rewritten. Shaptis belonging to one king appeared in the coffin of another. Several vessels bore inscriptions that had been hastily altered, as though priests were racing against time. Tomb robberies were common in late dynastic periods, but the sheer scale of mismatched objects in KV-35 suggests more than simple panic. It looks like a coordinated rescue operation for Egypt's royal lineage. The walls add another layer of intrigue. Certain scenes were left unfinished, gods outlined but never painted, spells from the Amduat missing entire lines, carving blocks smoothed with plaster but never completed. Royal tomb decoration wasn't optional, it was central to the king's transition into the afterlife. To stop mid-program implies a sudden interruption, something powerful enough to pull artisans from the job with no chance to return. Then there are the protective amulets, arranged in ways that defy standard ritual placement. Heart scarabs, jed pillars, and wadjet eyes were scattered in tightly clustered groups, positioned as if the priests were fortifying the king against forces that conventional ceremonies didn't fully address. Most unusual were the protective wands, typically reserved for infants or royal women, found near adult kings. Their presence has long puzzled Egyptologists. Protective wands symbolize the need to guard against chaotic forces, hinting that whoever oversaw KV-35 feared dangers beyond tomb robbers. Even the canopic equipment raises questions. Some jars were empty, others mismatched, and a few belonged to entirely different rulers. Ritual vessels showed signs of re-inscription, scraped and rewritten to match their new owners. Egyptians did not improvise funerary rituals unless they had to. Improvised rites point toward a moment when standard practices broke down, when speed mattered more than perfection. Modern analysis has revealed further evidence of repeated emergency activity. Soot deposits high on the walls indicate that priests re-entered the tomb centuries after Amenhotep II's burial, carrying torches through rooms where they had no reason to return unless they were forced to hide or move royal bodies again. Abrasion marks around the sealed annexes show where tools pried open entrances and resealed them, sometimes more than once. Chisel marks near the cache chamber reveal that workers widened passages after the tomb's original completion, adjusting the architecture to accommodate the influx of mummies. Taken together, these objects form a pattern: rapid rituals, mismatched artifacts, unfinished art, protective overcorrections, and multiple forced re-entries. It's the portrait of a kingdom under strain, one reacting to events so disruptive that normal religious and political rhythms could not continue uninterrupted. All of these finds strongly suggest that Amenhotep II ruled during a moment of profound disruption, one that some scholars associate with the Exodus described in biblical tradition. The shockwaves visible in KV-35, death, fear, instability, and sudden population shifts, appear not in written records, but in the hurried actions of priests and the objects they left behind. And that silence is telling. Ancient Egyptians were known for never recording their failures or disasters. Anything that threatened the king's divine image was simply omitted from official inscriptions. If Egypt had experienced a catastrophe on the scale described in the Exodus narrative, it would almost certainly have been erased from public record. KV-35 becomes, in this light, more than a burial site. It could be the physical evidence of a crisis Egypt refused to inscribe, a history preserved not in royal texts, but in the amulets, coffins, alterations, and emergency relocations carried out in the dim torchlight of a kingdom in turmoil. Amenhotep II and the Exodus timeline. The threads of ancient history rarely align neatly. Egyptian king lists, archaeological strata, and biblical chronology often speak in different dialects of time. And yet, when these fragments are examined closely, something unexpected begins to emerge, a pattern that points surprisingly to Amenhotep II. Egypt in the 15th century BC was at the pinnacle of power. Its borders stretched from the deserts of Nubia to the foothills of the Euphrates. Trade, diplomacy, and military prowess combined to create a kingdom that radiated stability. Amenhotep II inherited not just an empire, but a world that believed itself unshakable and accustomed to Egyptian dominance. But beneath this surface of apparent imperial order, gaps begin to appear in the historical record. Certain inscriptions go silent. Monumental projects are left unfinished. Administrative lists develop strange absences. Scribes who disappear mid-reign, officials who appear and vanish without explanation, air sequences that suddenly break. These gaps do not fit the profile of a fully stable empire. Some scholars interpret them as echoes of a crisis, possibly a sudden mortality event, a collapse in labor, or even a mass departure of people. And when placed alongside the extraordinary measures seen in KV-35, the emergency relocation of 9 royal mummies, the mismatched funerary objects, and the unusually protective amulet placements, the irregularities begin to feel less like coincidence and more like reaction. When this evidence is cross-referenced with the Exodus narrative, the parallels become intriguing. The biblical account describes a powerful kingdom struck by calamity, where a powerful ruler was confronted by an inexplicable departure of a large population and a series of events so destabilizing that they would have threatened the ideological foundation of Egyptian kingship. According to the biblical account, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, left Egypt, a figure that, if even partially historical, would have shaken any ancient kingdom to its core. If something comparable occurred during Amenhotep II's reign, it would explain both the archaeological signs of disruption and the silence in official inscriptions. For Egyptians were known never to record defeats, disasters, or anything that reflected poorly on the pharaoh's divine authority. A catastrophe of that scale would not be written on temple walls. It would be hidden, avoided, or buried. Amenhotep II himself was not insulated from the pressures of the time. His court endured a personal blow that reverberated far beyond grief: the death of his crown prince. The heirs passing, fragmentarily attested, but unmistakable, would have shaken the palace. Losing a prince was more than a tragedy. It was a rupture in cosmic order. Succession crises could unravel dynasties, invite conspiracies, or embolden enemies at the borders. After this event, the rituals surrounding the royal family intensify. Protective measures multiply. Priests begin employing amulets and objects outside their usual context. The atmosphere inside Amenhotep's court shifts toward heightened anxiety, as though the dynasty sensed vulnerabilities it could not openly name. Some researchers cautiously propose a link. If Egypt had been struck by epidemic, famine, or a dramatic population shift, as the Exodus narrative describes, such upheaval could have contributed indirectly to the crown prince's death or to the political instability that followed. We cannot draw direct lines between these events, but the alignment of crisis indicators, the gaps in the record, the protective urgency in KV 35, the sudden loss of an heir, suggests a kingdom facing pressures more severe than ordinary politics. Together, these threads form a portrait of Amenhotep II's reign that is far more turbulent than traditional history suggests.
And when I read it, I thought, why isn't this tomb known? Why isn't this famous?
Whether or not the Exodus occurred under his rule, the archaeological and chronological clues reveal a pharaoh navigating extraordinary stress, a ruler whose legacy was shaped not only by empire and power, but by silences, losses, and events that Egypt itself chose never to inscribe. Reading KV 35 like a forensic case file. Walk into KV 35, and it becomes clear that the tomb's real story isn't told in text. It's hidden in the physical clues left behind by priests scrambling to protect Egypt's dead. What follows is a forensic trail carved into stone and resin, where every scratch, stain, and hurried repair reveals a kingdom in crisis. The first step in this forensic reconstruction begins with the mummy of Amenhotep II himself. CT scans reveal that his embalmers worked with exceptional care. The brain was removed cleanly, the internal organs carefully extracted, and high-quality resins applied in consistent layers. Yet even these resins tell a story. Chemical analysis shows two distinct resin applications, one from the original burial and one applied much later, likely by priests of the 21st dynasty who entered the tomb centuries afterward. Their work was precise, but rushed, reinforcing the mummy as if expecting further disturbance. It was a rare act. Few pharaohs received secondary embalming treatments of this magnitude. Then there is the unusual condition of the funerary equipment surrounding him. The canopic chest shows signs of being opened and resealed at least twice. Microscopic residue inside the jar compartments suggests that the viscera, normally securely stored inside, had been moved or inspected. Why would priests open a canopic chest? Why tamper with the holiest elements of a king's body? Forensic specialists believe this indicates a search and rescue operation not of the living, but of the royal dead. The other mummies in the side chambers present their own clues. CT scans of Queen Taye show healed fractures and unique embalming methods consistent with elite 18th dynasty practice. But forensic analysis of the younger lady, later identified as Tutankhamun's mother, reveals something stranger. Several injuries on her skull do not match burial trauma. They occurred before she died. Whether the result of accident or political violence, her presence in KV 35 becomes more significant. If members of the royal family were dying under unusual circumstances, priests may have seen the tomb of Amenhotep II as the safest possible refuge. Even more revealing are the coffins themselves. Many were originally built for other kings, names scratched out, new ones painted hastily over the old texts. Some of these overwritten inscriptions contain errors, reversed hieroglyphs, missing determinatives, awkward spacing, signs that the work was done under pressure by scribes who did not have time to execute proper ritual proportion. Egyptologists refer to this as ritual compression, performing essential actions quickly without the full ceremonial protocol. In the royal cache chamber, forensic archaeologists observed something else: patterns of abrasion on the floor and lower walls, consistent with coffins being dragged rather than carried. Normally, royal coffins were transported on sledges or hoisted with ropes, accompanied by priestly processions. But here, physical evidence shows hurried movement, as if the priests were racing the clock. Torches used during these reburials left soot and chemical traces that match specific resin-bound wick types from the late New Kingdom. These match the same soot signatures found in DB 320, the other royal cache in Deir el-Bahari, where priests hid dozens of pharaohs. The implication is clear. KV 35 was part of a coordinated kingdom-wide effort to preserve royal mummies during a period of upheaval. Even the geology of the tomb contributes to the forensic narrative. Stone samples taken from the widened sections of the passage show tool marks inconsistent with the 18th dynasty and more consistent with the 21st dynasty. This proves that the tomb's architecture was altered long after Amenhotep II's burial, meaning priests expanded it specifically to accommodate the sudden influx of additional kings. One of the most startling forensic discoveries came from Amenhotep II's sarcophagus lid. A thin layer of gypsum mortar underneath the lid indicates it had been lifted and resealed at least once following the original burial. This was almost unheard of in royal practice. Disturbing the pharaoh's body was considered a cosmic offense. Yet somebody, centuries later, had opened this sacred chamber, performed something inside, and then resealed it. When all of these forensic details are assembled, secondary embalming, altered architecture, mismatched coffins, soot from emergency visits, and physical stress marks from hurried movements, a picture emerges of a kingdom dealing with something far more intense than ordinary tomb robbing. Something was destabilizing Egypt. Something pushing priests into drastic, unprecedented action. Something so serious that the evidence appears not in royal inscriptions, but in every scratch, stain, and improvised ritual inside KV 35. What Egypt recorded and what it carefully hid. Ancient Egypt left behind millions of words carved in stone, yet some of its most important stories were never written at all. To understand why KV 35's clues matter, it helps to step into the Egyptian mind, a world where writing was not a record of truth, but an instrument of cosmic order. What appeared on temple walls or stelae was not history, it was ideology. It was what Egypt wanted to be true. Egyptian kingship was built on one foundational belief. The pharaoh was the physical embodiment of divine stability. So long as he ruled, the universe itself remained in balance. This concept, known as Ma'at, was more than political propaganda. It structured religion, law, architecture, and even the way history was written. Anything that contradicted Ma'at, famine, defeat, rebellion, plague, or humiliation, was either reframed or erased entirely. This is why so many of Egypt's greatest crises linger only in archaeology, not in inscriptions. The Battle of Kadesh, one of the most perilous military conflicts in Egyptian history, was rebranded by Ramses II as a sweeping victory, despite overwhelming evidence that he was nearly crushed by the Hittite army. The Hyksos invasion, which shattered Egypt's political core for more than a century, is barely mentioned in contemporary texts. And the religious revolution of Akhenaten, a complete disruption of Egypt's traditional theology, was so thoroughly erased that for centuries, historians did not even know he existed. Egypt did not ignore these events, it hid them. This silence wasn't deception so much as survival. In Egyptian cosmology, to inscribe something was to give it life. Recording catastrophe risked empowering it, allowing chaos to live in stone. So disasters were pushed into the shadows, buried in tomb debris, abandoned monuments, and hastily sealed chambers. For archaeologists, the truth of Egypt's crises emerges not from royal inscriptions, but from what went wrong. unfinished construction, administrative discontinuity, sudden architectural modifications, and objects left where they never should have been. With this mindset in view, the anomalies in Amenhotep II's reign take on new meaning. We see inscriptional gaps precisely at the moments when the biblical narrative describes plagues and national distress. We see unfinished building projects and administrative reorganization. We see funerary rites compressed and executed under pressure. We see priests performing emergency relocations of royal mummies, bringing them into KV 35 as though Egypt's very lineage needed protection. And most tellingly, we see the death of the crown prince, an event of immense political and spiritual weight, recorded only in scattered, indirect traces. No stele mourned him. No monumental inscription proclaimed the tragedy. The disappearance of an heir destabilized the galaxy of power at the heart of the court. Yet the record is quiet, too quiet.
At the court's center, everything is quiet, painfully quiet. Egypt hid its wounds in silence. But in KV 35, the fear they buried still whispers through the darkness.
This fits the Egyptian pattern perfectly. Major ruptures, especially those that threatened the king's divine image, were never carved into temple walls. They were unspoken, ritualized, buried. The less said, the better. If an Exodus-like event, however one interprets it, occurred during Amenhotep II's reign, it would have been the kind of humiliation Egypt would never openly acknowledge. A mass departure of a labor force, a political embarrassment, calamities affecting the land, challenges to royal authority. All of these would qualify as the very things Egyptians systematically erased. Inscriptions would go silent, records would grow thin, damage control would move from texts to rituals, and that is exactly what the material culture shows. KV 35, with its rewrapped mummies, mismatched coffins, unusual amulet placements, widened corridors, and soot from hurried priestly visits, contains no written confessions, but it preserves something just as compelling: the physical fingerprints of a society responding to instability. The absence of inscriptions is not a contradiction, it is the expected outcome. Tombs like KV 35 become the places where suppressed history survives, not as written accounts, but as the archaeology of distress. Seen through this lens, Amenhotep II's reign becomes a crossroads of silence and upheaval. The official record is orderly, composed, and triumphant, but the tomb of Amenhotep II tells a different story, one carved not in hieroglyphs, but in the objects priests moved, reused, hid, and repaired in moments of fear. Whether these events intersect with the Exodus tradition remains debated, but the pattern beneath them, the tension between what Egypt chose to record and what it chose to conceal, gives KV 35 its extraordinary significance. It allows modern historians to read the past not only through the texts Egypt left behind, but through the silences it tried to preserve. The Pharaoh in the silence. KV 35 is more than a tomb. It's a contradiction. Amenhotep II lies in perfect order, untouched in his sarcophagus, yet everything around him tells a story of disruption. Coffins dragged across the floor, resins applied centuries apart, doorways widened long after the burial. 9 other pharaohs hidden like fugitives in the dark. On their own, these details are unusual. Together, they reveal a kingdom under strain. And just as striking as what KV 35 contains is what Egypt's official inscriptions do not contain. Egyptians never recorded their failures, plagues, defeats, rebellions, or anything that threatened the pharaoh's divine image. Those crises never reached stone. They were buried instead, concealed in the places where priests worked under torchlight, not in the monuments meant to project eternal order. This is why Amenhotep II's reign is so compelling. The historical record falls silent at key moments. Monument building slows. Officials vanish from the lists. A crown prince dies without explanation. Ritual activity intensifies. And deep inside KV 35, priests take extraordinary measures to protect Egypt's kings. None of this proves the Exodus with 100% certainty, but all of it strongly points at a kingdom facing pressures Egypt refused to record, precisely the kind of upheaval that biblical tradition places at the feet of a single pharaoh. If an event, like the Exodus of Moses, shook Egypt, something humiliating, destabilizing, or spiritually catastrophic, it would appear exactly as it appears now, in archaeological signatures, not inscriptions, in rushed burials, not royal proclamations, in the silence of the record, not the boasts carved on temple walls. KV35 becomes the place where that silence is preserved, not as a written confession, but as a physical memory of crisis. Whether Amenhotep II was the pharaoh of the Exodus remains an open question, but his tomb whispers a story of fear, urgency, and sudden disruption, one that Egypt tried to hide, and one that archaeology has slowly uncovered. Sometimes the loudest evidence is the silence left behind. When you look at the evidence inside KV35, what explanation makes the most sense to you, and what questions does it leave behind? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.